In the second reading today, St. Paul's letter to the Philippians, he reminds us that we have our citizenship in heaven. So he reminds us that as much as we may come from different countries here on this earth, speak different languages, and have different religious backgrounds, pagan, Gentile, Jew, we have our citizenship in heaven because we're all pilgrims here on this earth until we at last arrive one day and are united as one family in heaven. During the Lenten season, the first reading from the prophets often talks about the kind of sacrifice and mercy that God wants. He says, I don't really want sacrifices of lambs and bullocks and turtle doves. The sacrifice I want is that you take care of the poor, the widow, the orphan, the alien living in your land, etc. So kind of a very strong social justice theme to the first reading often throughout Lent. So Lent is a good season to remind ourselves about how we as Christians are necessarily involved in some way in issues of social justice in our country and in our world. As we have that kind of background to today's readings and today's topic, I spoke last week about how where there is struggle and where there is sacrifice, there can also be great virtue, right? And I warned you that today you might struggle and sacrifice as you listen to this homily, this presentation, these ideas. But just know that where there is struggle and sacrifice in your heart, there's also great virtue for you as well. Over the course of my time here at St. Francis, I've spoken on some difficult topics here and there, things that have certainly a strong moral issue, but also a slight political influence as well. So 2 or 3 years ago, I spoke on the U.S. Bishop's document, Faithful Citizenship, which says that a good Catholic is one who is also involved in the political process, some way, somehow, at some level. It's not the same for everybody. I spoke a little bit about the elections before the presidential elections a year and a half ago or so, how the Church endorses certain policies and talks on certain topics, but never endorses candidates. And within the past year, I also spoke on the embryonic stem cell research and why the Church is opposed to the use of embryos for that kind of stem cell research. Those are difficult topics, and I have to applaud you for your patience, your understanding, your staying put. You're struggling with those issues yourselves, I'm sure, in your heart and in your prayer life. It's difficult. And in the homily, it's not really a dialogue, right? It's just a monologue. It's only going in one direction. After Mass, I love to hear your objections to different topics and different ideas because it makes me process those thoughts myself, and it lets me bring them to other church officials who may need to know them. And so as I talk a little bit today about the U.S. Bishop's stance on comprehensive immigration reform, again, I ask for your patience, your calm, to be mature, to try to understand and figure things out, try to hear things from the U.S. Bishop's perspective. Doesn't mean that you're going to agree with them at the end, and that's fine. We're not looking to all think the same way on the same topics. We need to think rationally, you need to reason out things for yourself, and we may not all agree at the end of the day, and that's okay. As Catholics, it's okay to disagree on certain things. Also want to see this as a topic that's something spiritual as well. Spiritual from the aspect that affects how our attitude and our actions towards other people. Groups of people or individuals, whatever the case may be, the gospel impacts the way that we think about others and how we treat them as well. But the second component of spirituality on this topic, I think, is that for us Catholics, how we view our clergy, how we view our hierarchy and our bishops affects our spirituality. So when I'm doing well with my bishop, when I agree with him and what he's doing, my spirituality is a little bit better. But when I start disagreeing with my bishop on one thing after another, then I start thinking that my spiritual life is not going so well. At least personally, that's how it is. And that's what others would say about us Catholics, that our bishops, in a sense, have a great impact on our spirituality. So with that being said, I want to look at how the Church is involved in this issue, not because it's a political issue, but because it has moral components to it. And that's the main idea. What are some of the moral components? So basically, the U.S. bishops are seeking some kind of legislation for comprehensive immigration reform. Why? Because most numbers would put the number of illegal immigrants in our country around 11 million or so. It's a huge number, really. 11 million is a huge number, bigger than the population of many states, actually. And not everybody arrives illegally. Not everybody comes across the border, the land border or water border illegally. It's very easy to become an illegal immigrant. You just get a tourist visa for 6 months maximum, and you stay 8, right? You stay longer. You get your work visa, so you arrive legally for 5 years, and then you just stay longer, and you find someone else that employs you. So it's not hard to become an illegal immigrant. Not everybody comes illegally is the idea. Some do, but many do not as well. As I'm talking about these topics and weighing some of the issues, I really don't want to get into a big discussion about the costs. The San Bernardino Sun ran some articles on the costs of illegal immigrants to the U.S. taxpayers in the paper this week. Numbers are batted around back and forth. I have no idea what one puts into the economy versus what one takes out. I know that as an American myself, I have no doubt I cost our government. I have no idea how much, but I'm sure I cost our government from time to time. And I don't really want to get into the issue of jobs that nobody wants. They take jobs people don't want because those are desires. Whether I want a job or not, how can I measure how many people want that job or don't? I can't quantify it. So let's just set aside those 2 points and look at some of the other things, so we don't argue about those two. Just want to provide four different stories, people that I know. One story, a lady who comes to our country, to our diocese on a religious worker visa. A religious worker visa allows you to work in the U.S. for 5 years. You come as a non-immigrant, that's your status, meaning your intention is not to stay. That's how you kind of have to come, with no intention to stay. During the course of those 5 years, after 2 years of steady employment, you can work through the process, apply to the U.S. government for immigrant status, meaning I want to become a resident, green card, etc. And the government should get back to you before the end of 5 years, otherwise your time is up. Then once you become an immigrant, you have resident status. If one wants, one could continue on and become a U.S. citizen. During that time, she's paying taxes, just like you and I do, U.S. and federal and state taxes. So when the time runs out, she's here illegally, technically. In the meantime, is married and has a family, children that are citizens of this country. And she could be here illegally if the government gives no answer after 5 years. So just an example of where the process isn't working as well as it could. Second example, another way of coming to the country is being petitioned by your family. So relatives are in the country, and they petition you to come. So this young man was petitioned around the age of junior high by his family. He graduated from high school, speaks perfect English, entered the seminary, spent 10 years in the seminary being in formation, was ordained a priest, can't work as a priest, because the government never got back to his family about whether or not he's allowed to, on his status as one who is here being petitioned by family. He's not here illegally, he's just waiting.